Hi guys, Coach Alex from Fast Fitness Tips here. We're going to talk today about the problem of attaching that 11-speed cassette onto a 10-speed wheel. Now why is that of interest to anyone? Well, basically it's of interest because you can use all those wheels that were on the market from the year 2000 till about 2012 on your 11-speed bike, on your current bike. And that is a hell of an advantage because there's a huge amount of good value, high-spec wheels out there. Let's have a look at a few. Let me show you a few. Here's a rear lightweight wheel from Boardman, from the Chris Boardman company. It's one of the lightest rear wheels out there. It's about 600 grams for the rear wheel with that free hub. So we're talking about a wheel set that's around about 1,050 grams front and back combined. That's an amazing wheel. It only comes with that 10-speed free hub. Here's another example. Common British make, Sheffield make, Planet X. Planet X do this great deep dish rear wheel, 101 millimeters. And again, it comes with a standard 10-speed free hub. Now the thing is, you can buy in many of these wheels an 11-speed variant, but they're invariably very expensive. Buying the latest thing, for example, the Zip Super 9 disc or the Zip 900 disc that is in the 11-speed, it's likely to be around, $1,500 or so. But you can buy the Zip 900 10-speed disc maybe for $400 or $500 second hand. But the 11-speed automatically bumps that price up enormously. So there's a great rationale in looking for those 10-speed value wheels. Here's another example from PowerTap, the classic PowerTap Mavic Open Pro wheel. You can get that PowerTap, which is a brilliant training wheel, giving you power with the 10-speed hub. You can pick it up on eBay for around $200, $300, $400, whereas the new 11-speed is a lot more expensive. What about the tri-spoke, the carbon tri-spoke, like the Head 3 wheel? Again, you can buy a new one with an 11-speed hub. Very expensive, but you can get the old one with the 10-speed hub. You can pick that up for around about $200 on eBay. Incidentally, while we're looking at this wheel, if you look at that profile, look at that very narrow gap between the cassette and the spoke. In fact, that's as generous as you get because there's no issue with the dishing of the wheel with the carbon tri-spoke. If you measure it, you'll find that the space is obviously increased to accommodate the 11 cassette cogs as opposed to 10. And if you measure it exactly, you'll find that the 10-speed was around 35 millimeters, but the 11-speed has gone up by 1.8 millimeters to 37, or to give you the exact dimensions, 36.75 on the free hub. So just to clarify, inside the rear dropout, there's 130 millimeters of space for a road bike. Into that space goes the rear wheel, the axle, the hub, and on that hub, on the drive side, you've got the free hub, which is what the cassette attaches onto. And that free hub is 1.8 millimeters longer for an 11-speed system. So the question I want to solve today, guys, is how do we get those 10-speed wheels working on an 11-speed system? I'm going to tell you 7 ways to do that will solve almost every problem. Okay, here we go. Okay, so the first one is a little bit of a cheat if you like. If you bought your bike since 2012, 2013, it's quite possible, even if you bought a dedicated 10-speed road bike, it's possible that the hub actually already accommodates 11. In other words, they've just put a little spacer on there. So if you have a look at the back of your wheel, you might be able to see whether there's a rear spacer behind that cassette. And if there is, all you need to do is swap off the cassette and put your 11-speed cassette on, and no other fuss is needed. In other words, you're already laughing. Now, you're going to be really lucky if that's the case. It's very doubtful. So let's go on to the option 2. Option 2, it didn't come like that, but you already bought a Mavic wheel. Now, Mavic already have the spacing on their free hubs to accommodate 10 and 11 speed right back to the early 2000s. So basically, if you've got a Mavic wheel, it's highly likely that you can just swap out your 10-speed cassette and put your 11-speed cassette. It's probably going to have a little spacer on the back. You can just remove that 1 to 2 millimeter spacer and put your new cassette on there and you'll be fine. The next option is that you've got a Campagnolo system. Now here's the funny thing. Campagnolo already solved this problem right back to the year 2000. Now in 2000 they brought out their 10-speed system, but in 2012 or so when they brought out their 11-speed, they didn't want to re-engineer the hub. So what they did was they kind of cheated in a way, but it's a clever cheat. They took the cassette, the 11-speed cassette, and they dished it at the back. They basically made a concave area. And what that means is they can slide the 11-speed cassette onto their 10-speed existing hub with no modification. So if you've got a Campagnolo system, pretty much your 9, 10 and 11 are all mutually compatible. So if you've got Campagnolo 9, if you've got Campagnolo 10, you can just take off that 10-speed cassette and put on the 11 straight away. Now the problem there is your 10-speed bike indexing system is set up for 10, not 11. But if you buy a 10-speed Campagnolo wheel, what I'm saying is you can put that 10-speed wheel into your 11-speed Campag system straight away just by swapping the cassette and you'll be fine. Okay, next. If you bought any common wheel from a big manufacturer, whether that be DT Swiss, whether it be ProLite, Head, Boardman, Rolf, Fulcrum, PowerTap, American Classic, most manufacturers will allow you to go back to them and exchange the free hub In other words, take out that little piece from the wheel and fit a new one that is manufactured by the current manufacturer to be compatible with 11 speed. So you can just take out the existing 10, swap it over. It's around about $40 or $50. And if you're lucky, and most of the manufacturers for wheels in the last few years offer this, you'll be able to put in your 11 speed free hub onto your 10 speed wheel, and then you've got a completely functioning 11 speed system. All you need to do is put on the new cassette and you're away. It doesn't work for every manufacturer and it doesn't work for every wheel, but that's your next best step. But let's say you can't swap out the free hub by buying another one. What is the exact difference in that free hub between the 10 and 11? Well, the exact difference is not the diameter of the hub. The exact difference is that little shoulder there, and that little shoulder where the cassette butts up to often can be machined down. So you can actually physically machine that down or take it to your local machine shop. They'll use a lathe, they'll put a bar through there, make sure it's sitting central, machine it down by usually 1.8 millimeters. And that will enable you to take an existing free hub or existing wheel if you like. Sometimes you don't even have to remove the free hub from the wheel. You can do it on a machine. Take out that 1.8 millimeters from the shoulder. Now, in truth, it does weaken this, and there have been some instances where riders have cracked their free hub following that modification, but those are pretty rare, and usually there is space and, let's say, engineering capacity within that free hub to do that. But bear in mind, these free hubs are often aluminium now, not steel, and not some other fancy alloy like titanium. So it does weaken it, but it's something to bear in mind. You can do it. Just one tiny word of caution about that free hub alteration, and that is, although the standard difference is 1.8 millimeters, there is one exception, and that is the wheel made for purely Shimano 10 speed. And that's because Shimano shrunk the 10 speed cassette smaller than the 9 speed cassette by 0.8 millimeters. So the 10 speed pure Shimano cassette is actually 1 millimeter thinner than the 9 speed cassette. And what that means is the gap between the 10 and the 11 is 0.8 millimeters, not 1.8 millimeter. So just bear that in mind. But most hubs are actually 9/10 compatible. So that the difference is actually 1.8 millimeters for nearly all 9/10 Shimano wheels or SRAM wheel sets versus the 11 speed compatible wheel sets. Now let's say you don't want to modify the wheel. Let's say it's not your wheel, it's a sponsored wheel. You want to keep that wheel in pristine condition. You don't want to be messing about with the free hub, let's say. Well, what you can do is you can actually alter the cassette itself. Providing the cassette inner, the cassette body, is not made of plastic or carbon fiber, providing it's a solid material, you can actually machine the inside of the cassette. It's a lot more tricky than machining the free hub due to accessing these tricky splines, or the bits that go onto the hub splines, I should say. But basically, if you take out 1 or 1.8 millimeters of the cassette rear, it's very likely that that cassette will abut or slide up the free hub to the exact right degree. In other words, you can modify your 11 speed cassette to go on to the 10 speed free hub. It's far better to do it that way than put the 11 speed on, try and tighten up the lock nut and find you've got like 1 millimeter of thread to hold on to, and then use excessive force to try and squish those rings or those spaces in. So you're just forcing that 11 speed cassette onto that 10 speed free hub. That is not a good idea. You'll either strip the thread, or at some point the system will come loose. The whole thing will come loose under pressure, and you'll ruin your free hub. So don't force it on, guys. Do one of these other options. Okay, so let's recap. You don't have a wheel that's been bought in the last few years that's already compatible. You can't swap out the free hub by the manufacturer. You don't have a Campag wheel. You don't have a compatible Mavic wheel. You can't be bothered, or you haven't got the facilities to machine down the free hub or the cassette. What's the next step? Well, the next step is actually pretty clever, and that is taking an 11 speed cassette and putting it onto the 10 speed system by removing one of the rings. Now, if you're hoping to do this with like the SRAM Red, you're out of luck, because SRAM are making that cassette out of a one piece of titanium. So there's nothing to take out. It's basically one solid block. But you can buy, for example, the Shimano Ultegra system, which has individual sprockets. But hang on, which ring do you take out? Well, you don't want to really take out your biggest ring, because then you lose your easiest climbing gear. And you don't really want to take out the smallest ring, because then you lose your fastest gear for those descents. And what you want to do is to take out one of those middle rings that is not going to be a massive jump. So one that hasn't got already a 2-tooth difference between the higher and lower gear changes. And as it happens, if you get hold of the Ultegra 11 to 28, it turns out that the best ring to take out is the 14. And if you get the Ultegra 11 to 25, like this one, you want to take out the 16. In fact, the 17 and 18 are fused together anyway. So 16 is the only logical one really to take out there. And if you get the Ultegra 11 to 23, you want to take out the 17, but there is a problem with that one, which is that the 17 and 18 are fused. And because there's no obvious other choice, you're going to have to take out the 17 and 18 combined unit and then buy another 17 cassette cog off the internet with this relevant spacer. Well, this is already brilliantly described online on the Dark Speedworks website. Greg Grunner was the first one to really nail down which cog to remove to get that system working perfectly. Remember, the only downside is you're going to get a 10 speed system, albeit one that's indexing and working perfectly. Okay, so I've got one last option for you, and that's a clever one. Let's say you don't want to make any of these modifications. You can't buy a new free hub. You can't machine anything down. You don't want to be messing around with a 10-speed system. You desperately want that 11-speed cassette on the 10-speed hub. Now, there's one other option, and that is you can now buy a custom cassette, which is already pre-drilled to make it go on by a reputable mainstream manufacturer. In other words, two manufacturers have come out with a great product in the last 5 years. One is Edco, and that is the Edco monoblock. And that's actually a really clever piece of alloy where they've milled the entire cassette perfectly to fit on a 10-speed hub. And it's also super light, around about 157 grams. The only downside I've heard is that it doesn't have your dampeners that the new SRAM Red 1190 cassette has, those little polymer dampeners which reduce the sound. So you do get somewhat of an echo on that Edco monoblock. Another option, if you want to look at it, is the Token 1110. It's actually been made by Token Composites to solve this problem in exactly the same way. And the way both of those cassettes works is the way that Campagnolo did it a few years ago. In other words, remember that cheat of making the rear of the cassette concave? What they basically do is allow the big cog to set back further than the back of the cassette body. If you look closely at the SRAM Red 10 or 11 speed cassettes, you'll notice the back face of that cassette is completely flat. That tells you it's very hard to make that modification. They're also one piece, which makes it impossible to make that modification. That's why we're not really talking much about SRAM today. We're talking about Shimano. But remember, SRAM and Shimano spacing and gearing are all pretty much mutually compatible when we're talking about this change. And before I forget, one very last product on the market is the Wheels Manufacturer 11 converter cassette, which actually is really clever. Not only does it go onto the 10-speed Shimano SRAM hub, but it makes it a Campagnolo system. And where that's useful is if you've got a 10-speed Shimano wheel, but you want to run Campag, you can put that wheel manufacturer, that so-called wheel manufacturer cassette on there, and it will do that job in conversion for you. And we had quite a few of those old converter cassettes back in the 10-speed days, like the Ambrosio cassette, which would swap between Campag and Shimano on the free hub. A frequently asked question, by the way, is if you do have a Campagnolo free hub and you do put a Campagnolo cassette on there, can you run that Campagnolo cassette unmodified in a Shimano system? We've got quite a few clients and customers who've done that, and basically it does work. It might be a tiny bit more clunky than using the exact, using the same branded cassette from the same manufacturer, but basically you can do it. Surprisingly, it does work. So you can run that Campagnolo 11-speed wheel and 11-speed cassette, or 10-speed wheel with 11 cassette in a Shimano system or SRAM system. Surprisingly, that does work. That's a heads up for you guys if you didn't know it already. Okay, so a quick summary, you guys. What we're talking about today is getting an 11-speed system working on with those old 10-speed wheels. There's lots of ways to do it there. I've run down about 7 or 8 ways to do it there. And the main ways are: check your wheel in the first place, number 1. Can you change the free hub, number 2? Can you mill or machine the free hub? Take that 1 or 1.8 millimeters off the free hub and make sure it's safe to do so. That's number 3. Can you mill or machine the cassette if you want to, or buy that cassette, that modified cassette that's sold? The Dure Shimano version is already sold. If not, you can make that Greg Grunner switch. In other words, taking out the cogs from your existing 11-speed cassette. Yes, you do turn your bike into a 10-speed system, but it's a fair compromise, and usually we have a decent range in the cassette these days to be able to sacrifice one of those middle cogs. It's not such a major issue. You can buy one of those custom cassettes like the Edco or Token cassettes, or you might just get lucky and find that you've got a Campagnolo system and you probably get that working, or a Mavic wheel, you probably get that working as well. If in doubt, check online, check on the product website for your particular wheel. You probably find somebody else has looked at this and found a solution. Hope that helps, guys. Don't rule out those 10-speed wheels. Some of them are still really awesome quality and offer something special for a very reasonable price. Take care. Have a good ride.